The aliens captured Earth's smallest ship. Its cargo made their entire empire panic. Captain Voren Dask had seen many strange things in his 20 years of border patrol, but nothing as small and pitiful as the object drifting on his scanner that morning. It was barely the size of a cargo shuttle, dented on one side, with no weapons that his sensors could find. It moved slowly, tumbling end over end, as if it had been abandoned by its crew long ago. "Report," Voren said, leaning forward in his command chair. The bridge of his ship, the Ashvane, hummed quietly around him. Lights blinked on panels. His crew waited for his orders, the way they always did, calm and steady. His sensor officer, a young Korath named Fen, looked up from his console. "Sir, it is a human vessel. Registry markings match old human designs from the Outer Watch fleet. But sir, it is tiny. Smaller than anything we have seen from them before." Voren frowned. The Korath Empire had known about humans for almost 15 years now, ever since first contact along the edge of neutral space. There had been a short and bloody clash years back, an event the histories called the Border March Incident, where a handful of human ships had surprised a Korath patrol and destroyed 2 cruisers, before vanishing back into the dark. Since then, the Empire had treated humans with caution, but also with a quiet certainty that humans were still a young species, still small, still no real threat to an empire that spanned 40 star systems. This little ship in front of him now seemed to prove that point. It had no shields that his scanners could detect. No visible weapons, no escort, just a small hull drifting through space like a leaf on a slow river. "Life signs?" Voren asked. Fen shook his head. "None, sir. The ship appears to be unmanned. Some kind of automated courier, perhaps, or a supply drone." Voren stood up from his chair and walked closer to the main view screen. Through the dark of space, he could just make out the faint shape of the little ship, lit by the distant light of a red star. It looked so harmless, so easy to take. "Bring it in," Voren said. "Tractor beam. Slow and careful. I want it intact." "Yes, Captain." The tractor beam reached out from the Ashvane like an invisible hand and wrapped itself gently around the tiny human ship. Voren watched as it stopped tumbling and began to drift toward his cruiser instead, pulled along smoothly, without any resistance at all. No alarm sounded from the small ship, no defense systems activated. It came in as quiet and calm as a sleeping child. Voren allowed himself a small smile. This would look good in his report. A captured human ship, brought in without a single shot fired. His superiors back at Fleet Station Kalles would be pleased. Perhaps this small victory would even help his case for promotion, something he had wanted for years now. "Sir," Fen said again, "should we alert Fleet Command?" "Not yet," Voren said. "Let us see what we have first. No sense sending an exciting report over something that might turn out to be nothing but empty cargo crates." The bridge crew chuckled quietly at that. Everyone knew how the higher officers loved to make small things sound big in their official messages. Voren was not like that. He liked to be sure of things before he spoke about them. It took almost 2 hours for the tiny ship to be pulled fully into the docking bay of the Ashvane. When the doors finally closed and the bay filled with air again, Voren walked down personally to see it with his own eyes. The ship was even smaller up close than it had looked on the screen. It was barely 3 times the length of a Korath foot soldier standing at attention, and not much wider than a supply crate. Its hull was gray and plain, with a few faded markings that Fen's translation programs were already working to decode. There were no gun ports, no missile bays, nothing that looked like a weapon at all. "It really is tiny," said Lieutenant Sarah Ilm, the ship's engineer, walking up beside Voren with a scanner in her hand. She ran it slowly across the hull. "I am reading a small reactor core, some kind of automated flight system, and this is strange." "What is strange?" Voren asked. "There is a cargo compartment near the center of the ship. It is sealed very tightly, far more tightly than I would expect for something this small. The metal here is thicker than the rest of the hull by a wide margin." Voren stepped closer and looked at the section of hull Ilm was pointing to. It did look different from the rest of the ship. The metal here was a darker color, almost black, and there were strange markings painted across it in human symbols. Fen had followed them down to the bay, and he raised his scanner to read the markings. "The translation program is still learning human language," Fen said. but I believe this says something like, warning, restricted, authorized personnel only. That is not very helpful, Vorin said dryly. Every crate in the galaxy says that. Still, something about the sealed compartment made him pause. It was not fear, not exactly. But there was a small itch in the back of his mind. The same itch a soldier gets before a fight begins, even when there is no visible enemy yet. Scan it thoroughly before anyone touches it, Vorin ordered. I want full imaging. If there is a weapon inside, I want to know before we open it. Yes, Captain. The scanning took several more hours. Ilm and her team worked carefully, running every kind of scan they had. Radiation levels, magnetic fields, structural density. Everything came back close to normal, except for one strange reading buried deep inside the compartment. A small, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. It could be some kind of power core, Ilm said when she reported back to Vorin in his private office aboard the ship. Or a backup battery. It is putting out very little energy, almost nothing at all, but it is active. Active how? Vorin asked. I mean, it is doing something, cycling, like it is waiting. Vorin did not like the sound of that word, waiting. Machines did not wait unless they were built to respond to something. Keep the compartment sealed for now, he said. We will bring the whole ship back to Fleet Station Kalas. Let the analysts there take a proper look at it. This is beyond what we can safely study out here. It took another full day for the Ashvane to reach Fleet Station Kalas, a massive ring-shaped station that orbited the Korath home system's outer planet. The station bristled with defense platforms, docking arms, and thousands of small lights that marked the windows of laboratories, barracks, and command centers. It was one of the great symbols of Korath power, built over 3 generations. A place where captured ships from every corner of Korath space had once been studied and understood. Vorin stood at the viewport of his cruiser as they approached, watching the station grow larger and larger against the black of space. Somewhere down there, in one of those research bays, the little human ship would soon be pulled apart piece by piece, and its secrets, whatever they were, would finally come to light. He did not know, as he watched the station drawing closer, that this single small ship would soon make every soul in that great station feel a fear they had never known before. He did not know that far away, across the stars, humans had a saying about ships like this one. They called them sparrows, and they said that no matter how small a sparrow looked, you should never, ever, try to open its cage. Fleet Station Kalas was more than just a military post. It was one of the oldest and proudest symbols of Korath's strength, built long before Vorin had even been born. Generations of Korath engineers had added to it piece by piece, until it had grown into a vast ring of metal and light that circled the outer planet of the home system like a second moon. Inside its walls lived thousands of soldiers, scientists, and workers, all of them devoted to a single purpose, understanding every threat the Empire might ever face, and making sure the Empire was never caught by surprise again. That purpose had grown even stronger after the Border March incident. Vorin remembered that day well, though he had only been a young lieutenant at the time, serving aboard a different ship far from the fighting. The reports that came back afterward had shaken the whole fleet. A small group of human vessels, fewer in number and smaller in size than the Korath patrol they faced, had somehow destroyed 2 heavy cruisers before slipping away into the dark, without a single loss of their own. No one in the Empire had truly understood how it happened. The official reports called it luck, or perhaps some hidden weapon the humans had used only once and never again. But privately, in the quiet conversations shared between officers late at night, many had begun to wonder if humans were far more dangerous than they appeared. It was that quiet wondering that had built Fleet Station Kalas into what it now was. Reskatu's laboratory alone employed over 300 researchers, each one specialized in a different area of alien technology. There were rooms filled with captured weapons from a dozen conquered or defeated species, rooms where scientists studied strange metals that never seemed to rust, rooms where engineers tried to reverse the engineering of engines faster than anything the Empire had built on its own. And yet, in all those years, in all those rooms full of captured wonders, nothing had ever come from the humans, not until now. The docking of the Ashvane went smoothly. Fleet Station Kalas welcomed them with the usual formalities, and soon enough, A team of engineers and scientists came aboard to take charge of the small human ship. Chief Analyst Res Katu led the team, a serious woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being extremely careful with her work. She had studied captured technology from a dozen different species over her long career, and she was not the type to be easily impressed, or easily frightened. "So this is the great capture," she said, walking slowly around the tiny ship once it had been moved into her main laboratory bay. "I was told it would be small, but I did not expect it to be this small." "Do not let its size fool you," Vorin said, standing nearby with his arms crossed. "There is something strange sealed inside its cargo hold. My engineer picked up a strange pulse reading from it." Res raised an eyebrow. "A pulse?" "Like a heartbeat," Vorin said. "Slow, steady. It has not changed since we found the ship." Res walked closer to the marked section of hull, studying the dark metal and the painted human symbols with real interest now. She ran her fingers lightly along the seam, where the compartment door met the rest of the hull, feeling for any hidden mechanism. "Humans," she said thoughtfully, "are a strange species. From what little we understand of them, they do not believe in showing their full strength unless they must. Our reports on the border march incident describe ships that seemed unimportant right up until the moment they were not. I wonder if this little ship is the same kind of trick." "You think this could be dangerous?" Vorin asked. "I think," Res said slowly, "that we should be very careful before we decide it is not." She ordered her team to set up a full containment field around the sealed section of the ship before anyone attempted to open it. Thick, transparent barriers were wheeled into place, along with heavy blast shielding normally used for testing unstable alien reactors. It was more caution than Vorin had expected for something so small, but he did not argue. He had learned long ago to trust careful scientists over confident ones. For the next several hours, Res and her team worked patiently, running scan after scan, trying to understand exactly what kind of locking mechanism sealed the compartment shut. It was unlike anything they had studied before. There were no simple mechanical latches, no obvious circuits to bypass. Instead, the compartment seemed to be sealed by some kind of internal system that reacted to outside pressure and tampering, almost like a living thing curling up tighter the moment it felt threatened. "It is designed to resist forced entry," Res finally said, staring at her data screen with a frown. "The harder we try to force it open, the tighter it seals itself." "Then how do we get inside?" Vorin asked. "Carefully," Res answered. "Very, very carefully." She ordered her team to switch from force to precision. Instead of trying to break the compartment open, they would try to find a proper access point, something meant to be used by human hands under normal, authorized conditions. It was slow, painstaking work, made even slower by how little they truly understood human engineering. It was late into the station's artificial night cycle, when one of Res's junior researchers, a nervous young man named Doss, found something interesting. He had been running a deep scan along the underside of the compartment when his scanner picked up a small panel, cleverly hidden beneath a layer of the same dark metal as the rest of the seal. "Analyst Katu," he called out, his voice tight with excitement. "I found something. A panel. It looks like it might open with the right kind of pressure." Res hurried over, along with Vorin, who had been watching the work from the edge of the containment field for hours now, unwilling to leave despite the late hour. Together they studied the hidden panel on the scanner display. It did look like some kind of maintenance hatch, small enough to be missed unless you were looking very carefully. "Should we open it?" Doss asked. Res hesitated. She looked at Vorin, who gave a small, careful nod. "Slowly," Res said at last. "One step at a time. And everyone stay behind the blast shielding until I say otherwise." Doss carefully guided a small robotic arm toward the hidden panel, using tools designed for delicate work rather than brute force. The arm reached out, touched the panel gently, and pressed in a specific pattern that the scan had suggested might be the correct sequence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, deep inside the sealed compartment, a soft click echoed through the quiet lab. The steady pulse that Ilm had first detected aboard the ash vein suddenly changed. It grew faster. Not wildly, not in a panic, but with the calm, deliberate speed of something that had just woken up and understood exactly what was happening around it. A single thin line of pale blue light appeared along the edge of the compartment door, glowing softly in the dim laboratory. Reskatu felt a chill run down her spine, though she could not have explained why. She had studied countless strange machines before, and none of them had ever made her feel quite the way this one did now. "Analyst Katu," Doss said quietly, his eyes fixed on the glowing light. "I think it just noticed us." Vorin stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm at his belt, though he knew it would do nothing against whatever was behind that door. "Katu," he said, his voice low. "What did we just wake up?" Rest did not answer right away. She simply stared at the thin blue light, watching it pulse steadily in the dark, patient and unafraid, as if it had been waiting all along for exactly this moment to arrive. "Pull back," she finally said, her voice sharp and clear. "Everyone, behind the shielding, now." The researchers moved quickly, years of training taking over where fear might otherwise have slowed them down. Doss guided his robotic arm away from the panel and stepped back behind the thick, transparent barrier, his hands trembling slightly as he worked the controls. Vorin stayed close to Res, watching the glowing seam of light with the same steady attention he would give to an enemy ship on his tactical display. "Katu," he said quietly, "talk to me. What is happening?" "I do not know yet," Res admitted, which was not something she said often. She tapped at her datapad, pulling up every reading her instruments could give her. Power output inside the compartment has increased. Still very small, but rising steadily. Whatever this is, it is not simply reacting to being touched. It is doing something on purpose. Is it a weapon? If it is not behaving like any weapon I have ever studied. Weapons want to release energy quickly, all at once, to cause the most damage. This is doing the opposite. It is slow, controlled, patient. The word patient seemed to hang in the air of the laboratory, uncomfortable and strange. Machines were not supposed to be patient. Patience was something living minds had, something built from long thought and careful planning. A simple cargo container should not have been able to feel anything at all, let alone wait so calmly for whatever it was waiting for. Doss, still watching his monitor from behind the shielding, suddenly called out again. "Analyst Katu, I am picking up a new signal, very faint. It looks like, I think it is trying to transmit something." Res's head snapped up. "Transmit to where?" Doss's fingers flew across his console, chasing the faint signal before it could vanish. "I cannot tell yet. The signal is weak, and it is using some kind of encoding I have never seen before. It could be nothing. A stray energy discharge. Or it could be a message," Vorin finished grimly. No one in the laboratory spoke for a long moment. The thin blue light along the compartment door continued its slow, steady pulse, indifferent to the fear and confusion spreading through the room around it. Res finally straightened her shoulders and turned to the small group of researchers gathered behind the shielding, all of them watching her, waiting for direction. "I want full logs of everything, since the moment we touched that panel. Every reading, every signal, every change in power output. I want it cross-checked twice before anyone reports a single word to Fleet Command." "And if it is transmitting something?" Doss asked nervously. "Should we try to block the signal?" "Not yet," Res said. "If we panic and start smashing at systems we do not understand, we may make things far worse. Right now, we watch, we learn, and we do not touch that compartment again until we know exactly what we are dealing with." Vorin watched the calm, careful way Res gave her orders, and he felt a small measure of relief at having a scientist like her in charge of something so strange. But even as the laboratory settled into a tense, careful quiet, he could not shake the same itch he had felt back aboard the Ashvane, the soldier's instinct that told him something important was happening, something far bigger than a single small ship drifting lost in the dark. He thought of the Border March incident again, of ships too small to matter that had somehow humbled 2 Korath cruisers. He thought of the calm, patient pulse glowing steadily behind the shielding in front of him, utterly unbothered by the fear it had caused. And for the first time since he had spotted that tiny human ship on his scanner, Captain Vorin Dask found himself wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in bringing it home at all. Outside the laboratory, far above in the quiet dark of space, the stars continued their slow turning, indifferent to the small drama unfolding inside Fleet Station Kalis. But somewhere among those countless points of light, a very old and very careful signal was already beginning its long journey outward, carrying with it a single quiet message meant for ears many, many light years away. And though none of the Korath in that laboratory could have known it yet, the countdown had already begun. Reskatu did not sleep that night. She sat in her office just off the main laboratory, surrounded by data screens showing the same steady pulse from the sealed compartment, watching it rise and fall like slow breathing. Doss had managed to trace a small piece of the faint signal before it faded away completely. But what he found only raised more questions than it answered. It was aimed outward, Doss explained the next morning, standing nervously in front of Ress's desk. Away from the station, away from the home system entirely. Based on the angle and the timing, I believe it was aimed toward human space. You believe, Ress repeated. Not certain. The signal was too weak and too brief to be fully certain of anything, Analyst Katu. But the direction lines up with what little we know of human territory. Ress rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of a full night without rest pressing down on her. So the moment we opened that panel, the ship tried to send a message home. That is what it looks like, yes. And we have no way to know what that message said. Doss shook his head slowly. No, Analyst, not yet. Ress stood up and walked to the window of her office, looking down at the laboratory floor below, where the small human ship still sat inside its containment field, quiet now, its blue light dimmed to a soft, steady glow. It looked so small and harmless from up here. And yet something about it had already reached across the stars, to speak with someone, somewhere, without asking anyone's permission first. Get me everything we have on human communication technology, she said. Every scrap, every old report. I want to understand what that ship might have said, and to whom. The research that followed took the better part of 2 days. Analysts from other departments were pulled in to help, cross-checking old records from years of scattered contact with humans, including transcripts recovered from the aftermath of the Border March incident. Slowly, a picture began to form, though it was far from complete. Humans, it seemed, did not build their communication technology the way the Korath Empire did, where Korath ships relied on relay stations and powerful central transmitters to send messages across long distances. Human ships appeared to use something stranger. Small, self-powered beacons, capable of sending brief bursts of information across vast distances, without any relay at all. The technology was not fully understood, but the evidence suggested humans had built an entire hidden network of these beacons, scattered quietly across many systems. Systems that the Korath Empire had assumed were empty, unclaimed and unimportant. They have been watching us, Ress said quietly, staring at the star map now spread across her main screen, dotted with small markers where beacon signals had been detected or suspected over the years. Longer than we thought, farther than we thought. Captain Voran Dask, who had remained at the station rather than return to patrol duty, given the strange circumstances, stood beside her, studying the same map with a grim expression. If that is true, then that little ship we captured may not have been drifting by accident at all. What do you mean? I mean, Voran said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke it aloud. What if it was placed there on purpose? Not lost, not abandoned, left, like a marker, or a trap. Ress's turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. A trap for what? For anyone foolish enough to pick it up. The words hung heavy in the quiet office. Neither of them said anything for a long moment, both turning the idea over in their minds, testing it for weaknesses and finding none. It was around this same time that word of the strange discovery finally reached the highest levels of the Korath government. Grand Overseer Malkuth, ruler of the Korath Empire and leader of its great governing council, received the first full report on the captured human ship 3 days after the Ashvane had docked at Fleet Station Kalis. He read it twice, sitting alone in his private chambers high above the capital city, before calling an emergency meeting of his closest advisors. Malkuth was not a young ruler. He had led the empire for over 30 years, guiding it through wars, treaties, and the slow, steady growth that had made the Korath Dominion one of the most powerful forces among the known stars. He had seen many strange reports cross his desk over the decades, and he had learned long ago not to panic over every unusual event. But something about this particular report bothered him, in a way few things had before. A ship the size of a shuttle, he said slowly, once his advisors had gathered around the long stone table in his meeting chamber, captured without resistance, carrying a sealed compartment that woke up the moment we touched it, and sent a signal to human space before we could stop it. Have I understood this correctly? That is correct, Grand Overseer, said Advisor Jareth Vole, the head of the Empire's intelligence division, a thin man with a sharp, careful voice. Analyst Katu's team believes the ship may have been placed deliberately, perhaps as some kind of warning device, or a test. A test of what? We do not yet know. Malketh leaned back in his chair, his old eyes narrowing, as he considered the map of known space projected above the table, showing the location where the ship had first been found, far along the quiet edge of Korath territory. It was a region the Empire had always considered safely under its control, patrolled but unremarkable. If humans had been watching that region closely enough to place a device there, it meant they understood Korath territory far better than anyone had ever suspected. There is something else, Grand Overseer, said an elderly voice from the far end of the table. It belonged to Archivist Dorith Sen, the oldest member of the Council, a woman who had served 3 different Grand Overseers over the course of her long life, and who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. Go on, Archivist, Malketh said. This is not the first time something like this has happened, Dorith said slowly. I have spent the last 2 days searching through the old records, ever since I heard the first reports of this capture. There is a story, an old one, from before your time, Grand Overseer, from the days of the Vantic Concord. A quiet murmur passed around the table. The Vantic Concord had been a rival power once, an old empire that had bordered Korath territory on its far side, powerful and proud, until it had simply vanished nearly 40 years ago. No one had ever fully understood what happened to it. Its systems had gone dark almost overnight, its fleets scattered or destroyed, its people falling into chaos that had taken years to settle. The official history taught in Korath schools called it a great civil collapse, a warning about the dangers of internal corruption and weak leadership. But Dorith's expression now suggested there was more to the story than the official history admitted. What are you saying, Archivist? Malketh asked carefully. I am saying, Dorith replied, that in my research, I found a single old intelligence report, buried and mostly forgotten, filed only weeks before the Vantic Concord's collapse began. It describes the Concord's border patrol capturing a small, unmanned vessel of unknown origin, carrying a sealed cargo hold that reacted when tampered with. The report was never followed up. Whatever happened afterward was never recorded, because whoever might have recorded it was likely no longer alive to do so. The room fell utterly silent. You believe, Malketh said slowly, that the Vantic Concord captured a ship like this one, and that this is why they fell. I believe it is possible, Grand Overseer. I cannot say for certain. The old records are incomplete, and much was lost during the chaos of their collapse, but the similarities are too strong to ignore. Malketh looked around the table at the pale, worried faces of his advisors. Outside the window of his meeting chamber, the lights of the Korath capital stretched out for miles in every direction, calm and peaceful, utterly unaware of the quiet fear now spreading through the highest levels of their government. Send word to Fleet Station Kalis, Malketh said finally, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on his chest. I want that ship studied further, but carefully, and I want direct contact attempted with human authorities immediately. If this is some kind of warning, I want to know what it is warning us about, before we suffer the same fate as the Vantic Concord. Back at Fleet Station Kalis, Reskatu received the Grand Overseer's orders, with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because it meant she would finally have the full support of the Empire's resources behind her research. Dread, because it confirmed her growing suspicion that this was far more serious than a simple curiosity. Her team worked around the clock over the following 2 days, carefully studying every readable fragment of human technology aboard the small ship, without daring to open the sealed compartment any further. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to piece together fragments of the ship's outer systems, its navigation logs, and a handful of automated maintenance messages, written in simple human language that their translation programs could finally begin to understand clearly. It was Doss who found the first truly readable message, buried deep in what remained of the ship's outer computer systems, a small automated log meant only for routine maintenance crews. He brought it straight to Ress's office late one evening, his face pale. Analyst Katu, he said, I think you need to see this. The message, translated as best their programs could manage, was short and simple. the kind of plain instructional language meant for a low-level maintenance worker, rather than any grand warning meant to frighten an empire. And yet its plainness made it somehow more unsettling than any dramatic threat could have been. Unit designation, Sparrow-class courier, it read. Cargo, response beacon, Class 1, status, dormant unless tampered with. Upon unauthorized access, activation sequence begins. Full signal transmission will complete within 72 standard hours of initial contact. Do not attempt to disable. Do not attempt to destroy. If discovered by unauthorized parties, please return the unit along with a formal apology, and this incident will likely be resolved without further escalation. Ress read the message 3 times before she finally set it down on her desk, her hands trembling slightly. 72 hours, she said quietly, from initial contact. DOS, she said, her voice tight. When did we first touch that panel? DOS checked his datapad, his face growing paler still. 2 days ago, Analyst Katu. Almost exactly 2 days ago. Ress closed her eyes for a moment, doing the math in her head, though she already knew the answer before she finished the calculation. Less than a full day remained before whatever this response beacon was meant to do would finish doing it. She thought of Dorothy Sen's story about the Vantic Concord, of an old empire that had vanished into chaos after touching something very much like this. She thought of the strange, calm politeness of the message in front of her, a warning delivered not with anger or threats, but with the simple patience of someone who expected to be listened to, and who did not particularly care whether they were or not. Please return the unit, the message had said, along with a formal apology. It read less like the words of an enemy, and more like the quiet, tired patience of a parent, explaining, once again, why a child should not touch something dangerous. Ress picked up her comm unit with shaking hands, and opened a direct channel to Captain Voran Dask, who had been resting in his quarters after 2 long days without proper sleep. Captain, she said, the moment the channel connected, I need you in my laboratory immediately. And I need you to contact Fleet Command. Tell them the countdown has already started, and we have less than a day left to decide what we are going to do about it. Captain Voran Dask arrived at Ress's laboratory less than 10 minutes after her call, still pulling on his uniform jacket, his hair uncombed from sleep. He read the translated message twice, the same way Ress had, before looking up at her with the same grim understanding in his eyes. We need to contact Fleet Command right now, he said. Not in an hour. Now. I already sent word, Ress said. But Captain, think about what this message says. It does not sound like a threat built to frighten us into panic. It sounds almost reasonable. It asks us to return the unit and offer an apology. It does not demand we surrender, or hand over territory, or anything an empire usually demands from another empire it wishes to humble. That could be worse, Voran said quietly. A threat we understand, we can prepare for. A threat that sounds calm and reasonable, and yet still frightened an entire empire out of existence 40 years ago, is far harder to plan against. Ress did not have an answer for that. She simply nodded and turned back to her data screen, where Doss and the rest of her team were still combing through every scrap of the ship's systems, searching for anything else that might explain what, exactly, would happen once the 72 hours finally ran out. It did not take long for word to spread through the highest levels of Fleet Station Kalis. Within the hour, the station's commanding admiral, a stern old soldier named Cale Thurn, called an emergency meeting in the station's central command hall. Ress, Voran, and Doss were all summoned to attend, along with a dozen other senior officers and scientists, all of them looking pale and tired under the harsh white lights of the meeting hall. Let me understand this clearly, Admiral Thurn said, once Ress had finished explaining everything her team had learned. We have less than a day before this device finishes doing whatever it is designed to do, and we do not know what that is. That is correct, Admiral, Ress said. And your best guess is that it will send some kind of signal calling for a human response. Our best guess, Ress corrected carefully, based on the little we understand of the message and the partial signal Doss detected earlier, is that the device is meant to alert someone in human territory that this ship has been tampered with by an unauthorized party. What exactly follows that alert, we cannot say for certain. Can we destroy it? Thurn asked. Simply blow the whole ship apart before the countdown finishes? The message specifically warns against that, Voran said. Do not attempt to disable. Do not attempt to destroy. Given what Archivist Sen found in the old Vantic Concord records, I would be very cautious about ignoring that warning. Thurn's jaw tightened, the frustration plain on his weathered face. He was a soldier who had spent his whole life solving problems with strength and firepower, and the idea of an enemy device he could not simply destroy clearly did not sit well with him. "Then what do you suggest we do, Analyst Katu?" he asked, turning back to Res. Res took a slow breath before answering. "I suggest we do exactly what the message asks. Return the unit, along with a formal apology, through whatever diplomatic channel we can reach fastest. If the warning is honest, perhaps it will be enough to stop whatever comes next. If it is not honest, then at least we will have tried the peaceful path before resorting to anything more drastic." A heavy silence fell over the command hall. No one wanted to admit that an empire as vast and powerful as the Korath Dominion might need to apologize to a tiny, unmanned scout ship belonging to a species most of them still privately considered young and unproven. And yet no one in that room could offer a better plan either. It was Admiral Thurn himself who finally broke the silence, his voice heavy with reluctant decision. "Send the message to the Grand Overseer. Recommend immediate diplomatic contact with human authorities, along with the return of the ship. I will not risk this station, or this empire, on stubborn pride alone." The order went out within the hour, carried along the Empire's fastest communication relays toward the nearest point of contact with human territory, a quiet, neutral station, where limited diplomatic exchanges between the two species had occasionally taken place over the past several years. But even the fastest relay would take precious hours to reach that station, and further hours still for any human reply to make its way back. Every one of those hours would be measured now against the same steady, silent countdown ticking away deep inside the small sealed compartment aboard the captured Sparrow. At the neutral station called Greywatch, sitting quietly along the thin border between Korath and human territory, a young Korath diplomat named Essa Voren received the urgent message from Fleet Command with a growing sense of dread. She had served at Greywatch for nearly 3 years, handling small trade disputes and minor border misunderstandings. But nothing in her career had prepared her for a message marked with the highest priority code the Empire possessed. She read the orders twice. "Contact the human liaison immediately. Explain the situation honestly and fully. Offer the return of the captured vessel, along with a formal written apology from the Korath Empire. Request, respectfully, that no further action be taken." Essa sat for a long moment at her small desk, staring at the words respectfully and request, words that felt strange and unfamiliar coming from an empire that rarely used them when speaking to other species. The Korath Dominion did not usually apologize. It negotiated from strength, offered terms rather than requests, and expected other powers to adjust to its wishes rather than the other way around. That her superiors were willing to break from that long habit now told her more clearly than any report could have just how frightened they truly were. She opened a direct channel to the small human liaison office at Greywatch, staffed by only 2 humans who handled communication between the 2 governments. It was still the middle of the night for them, she knew, based on the schedules they had shared long ago, but the message was marked for immediate delivery regardless of the hour. The human who answered the channel was a woman named Sarah Klein, calm and alert despite the late hour, her hair pulled back, and her uniform slightly wrinkled from sleep. "Diplomat Voren," Sarah said, her voice polite but curious. "This is an unusual hour for you to reach out." Essa chose her words carefully, following the script her superiors had sent, though her voice still trembled slightly as she spoke. "Liaison Klein, I bring an urgent message from the Korath Empire. 3 days ago, one of our patrol ships recovered a small unmanned vessel drifting in neutral space near our border. We have since identified it as belonging to your Outer Watch fleet, of what your people call the Sparrow class." Sarah's expression shifted slightly at that, though she said nothing yet, waiting for Essa to continue. "During our examination," Essa went on, "our researchers accessed a sealed cargo compartment aboard the vessel, which appears to have triggered some kind of automated response protocol. We found a message indicating a signal would be sent, and that a response would follow within 72 hours of initial contact. On behalf of the Korath Empire, I have been instructed to offer the immediate return of the vessel, along with our sincerest apology for this unfortunate misunderstanding, and to ask that no further escalation take place." There was a long pause on the other end of the channel. Sarah Klein's calm expression did not change, But something behind her eyes seemed to sharpen, the way a person's expression sharpens when they suddenly understand a situation far better than the person speaking to them. "I see," Sarah said slowly. "And how long ago did your people first make contact with the sealed compartment?" Essa checked the timestamp in her orders. "A little over 2 days ago, Liaison Klein." Sarah nodded slowly, her fingers already moving to something just out of view of the camera, likely a comm unit of her own. "Thank you for informing us, Diplomat Voren. I will pass this along through the proper channels immediately. I would also strongly recommend that your people avoid any further attempts to access, move, or interfere with that vessel or its cargo in any way until you hear back from us." "Of course," Essa said quickly. "We understand the seriousness of the situation." "I am not certain that you do," Sarah said, not unkindly, but with a quiet weight behind the words that made Essa's stomach tighten. "But you will, soon enough. I will be in touch as quickly as I can." The channel closed, leaving Essa alone in the quiet of her small office, staring at the blank screen in front of her. Somewhere far above her, the countdown continued, and somewhere far away, in offices and command centers she could not see, humans were already beginning to move. Far above Fleet Station Kalis, hidden among the quiet turning stars, the small dormant beacon aboard the captured human ship continued its patient countdown, steady and unhurried, utterly indifferent to the fear now spreading through every level of the Korath Empire. It did not know, and did not seem to care, whether the beings who had found it would listen to its simple warning in time. It simply waited, the way it had been built to wait, counting down toward a moment that had been decided long before any Korath eyes had ever laid sight on it at all. Sarah Klein did not wait for morning. Within minutes of closing the channel with Diplomat Essa Voren, she had already sent an emergency priority message up through the human chain of command, flagged with a code that had not been used in nearly a decade. The code was simple. It meant one thing only: a sparrow had been found. The message traveled quickly through a series of hidden relay points scattered across the border systems, each one designed to pass information along far faster than any normal communication network could manage. Within 2 hours, it reached Outer Watch Command, a quiet but heavily secured facility built into the side of a moon, deep inside human territory, far from prying eyes. Admiral Grace Okafor read the message twice before setting down her datapad and rubbing her tired eyes. She was not an old woman, not yet, but the weight of her position had aged her in ways that showed clearly whenever she allowed herself a moment of stillness like this one. "How long ago was contact made?" she asked the young officer standing at attention across her desk. "Just over 2 days ago, Admiral. According to the Korath diplomat, their researchers accessed the sealed cargo compartment without knowing what it was." Grace nodded slowly. She had been part of the team, many years ago, that had designed the Sparrow program in the first place, back in the difficult years after humanity had first ventured beyond its own solar system and discovered just how dangerous the wider galaxy could be. She remembered the arguments that had gone into building it, the fierce debates about whether such a system was too aggressive, too likely to provoke conflict rather than prevent it. In the end, the program had been built the way it had for one simple reason. Humanity had learned, through hard and bitter experience, that appearing weak invited attack, but appearing openly strong invited fear and preemptive war. The solution the Sparrow program offered was neither. It offered quiet patience. Small, unassuming ships scattered carefully across contested and unclaimed space, watching, listening, saying nothing, unless disturbed. And if disturbed, offering first a simple, honest warning, giving whoever had found them every chance to walk away peacefully before anything more serious occurred. "Pull the file," Grace said. "I want the full activation sequence in front of me within the next 10 minutes. The activation sequence, once it appeared on her screen, was simple and precise, built with the same careful patience that had gone into every other part of the Sparrow program. Once initial unauthorized contact was detected, a 72-hour window began. During that window, the Sparrow's onboard systems would attempt, quietly and repeatedly, to warn whoever had found it, hoping the situation could be resolved without further escalation. If the window expired without resolution, a second, far more serious signal would automatically transmit, alerting the nearest human response fleet to the exact location where the Sparrow had last been active, along with a full record of everything that had happened to it since. That response fleet was not large. It did not need to be. It was built to demonstrate exactly one thing to whoever received the signal: that humanity had been watching that region of space far more closely than anyone realized, and that humanity's reach extended much farther than its modest, quiet appearance ever suggested. "How much time remains before the second signal activates?" Grace asked. The young officer checked his datapad, his expression tightening. "Based on the timestamp the Korath diplomat provided, Admiral, a little under 19 hours. Grace closed her eyes briefly. 19 hours was not much time. Not for a message to travel back and forth across such distances. Not for careful diplomacy. Not for anything except the barest, fastest kind of decision-making. And yet 19 hours was exactly what the Sparrow program had been built to allow. No more and no less. A careful balance between giving a foreign power enough time to make things right, and not so much time that the warning lost its meaning. "Contact the Council," Grace said. "Tell them we have a live Sparrow situation on the Korath border, and that the window is closing fast. I want authorization to proceed as planned if it does close. And if the Council asks you to intervene early, to stop the signal before it activates?" Grace looked up sharply at that. "We do not stop the signal early. That is the entire point of the system. If we start making exceptions every time a foreign power seems apologetic enough, the whole program loses its meaning. And one day, some other empire will call our bluff when it truly matters. The Korath Empire touched something they were warned not to touch. They will face the consequence the system was built to deliver, exactly as planned." The young officer hesitated. "Even if it risks war, Admiral?" Grace stood from her desk and walked slowly to the window of her office, looking out over the quiet gray landscape of the moon outside, dotted with the lights of Outer Watch Command's hidden facilities. "The Sparrow response is not war," she said. "It never has been. It is a demonstration, carefully measured, meant to end in negotiation rather than destruction, provided the other side has the sense to listen once it arrives. Whether it leads to war depends entirely on what the Korath Empire chooses to do once our response fleet shows up. That choice was never ours to make for them." Back at Fleet Station Kales, the atmosphere had grown steadily more tense as the hours ticked away. Reskatu had barely left her laboratory since the countdown had been discovered, surviving on quick meals brought to her desk and short naps taken in her chair whenever exhaustion finally overcame her. Captain Voran Dask had remained at her side nearly the entire time, unwilling to leave despite having no official role in the research itself. "Any word from Greywatch?" Voran asked, for perhaps the 10th time that day, as he watched Res sift through yet another set of readings from the small human ship. "Nothing yet," Res said, not looking up from her screen. "Diplomat Voran's last message said the human liaison had passed our apology up their chain of command, but that is all we know. We have no way to know if they will respond in time, or if they will respond at all. And if they do not?" Res finally looked up at him, her tired eyes shadowed with worry. "Then we find out exactly what happened to the Vantic Concord 40 years ago." It was Doss who broke the heavy silence that followed, hurrying into the laboratory with a datapad clutched tightly in his hands, his face pale even by his usual nervous standards. "Analyst Katu," he said, "I found something else, buried deeper in the ship's systems than anything we found before. I do not think it was meant to be easily accessible. I only found it because I was running a full diagnostic scan, trying to understand the compartment's power source." "Show me," Res said, standing quickly. Doss brought up the data on the main screen, a long stretch of human text that their translation programs had struggled with for hours, before finally producing something readable. It appeared to be some kind of internal design log, the sort of technical document an engineer might leave behind, explaining the reasoning behind a particular system, meant only for other engineers to read, never intended for outside eyes at all. "Sparrow Class Response Protocol," it began. "Designed following the incursion events of early contact era. Purpose: to provide early warning and measured deterrence across contested and unclaimed territory, without requiring permanent military presence. Rationale: humanity lacks the population and industrial base to maintain large standing fleets across every region of interest. The Sparrow system allows a small number of unmanned vessels to achieve a deterrent effect, similar to a full military presence, by ensuring that any hostile action taken against them will be answered, Eventually, regardless of distance or time elapsed. Ress read the passage twice, her stomach sinking with each word. They built this because they are weak, she said slowly, almost to herself, not because they are strong. What do you mean? Vorin asked. Do you not see it, Captain? Ress turned to him, her voice tight with a strange mixture of fear and something close to reluctant admiration. This is not the technology of some overwhelming military power looking to expand its territory. This is the technology of a species that knows it cannot defend everything it cares about directly, and so built a system that makes attacking it more costly than it is worth. They cannot watch every corner of space themselves, so they made it so that we would believe they were watching anyway. Vorin stared at the words on the screen for a long moment, remembering the calm, patient message they had found earlier, the strange politeness of it, the reasonable request for an apology rather than a demand for surrender. The border march incident, he said slowly. The ships that destroyed our cruisers and then vanished without pursuing further. That was not overconfidence. That was restraint. I believe so, Ress said quietly. I believe humans could likely have destroyed far more that day, if that had been their goal. I believe they stopped once the lesson had been delivered, the same way this beacon is offering us a chance to stop things now, before whatever comes next arrives. The laboratory fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the quiet hum of machines and the distant murmur of researchers working at nearby stations, none of them yet aware of the full weight of what Ress and Vorin had just come to understand. It was nearly 17 hours into the countdown when word finally arrived from Greywatch, carried along the fastest relay channels available. Diplomat Essa Vorin's message was short, and its tone carried a weight that made Ress's hands go cold as she read it aloud to the small group gathered in her laboratory. The human liaison has confirmed receipt of our apology and offer to return the vessel, Ress read. However, she states clearly that the Sparrow Protocol does not allow for early cancellation once activated, regardless of any apology offered afterward. She states that a response fleet has already been authorized to proceed, and that it will arrive at the location of the original capture once the countdown reaches 0. They are refusing to stop it? Vorin said, disbelief plain in his voice. Even after we apologized? Even after we tried to make this right? She adds, Ress continued, her voice growing quieter, that the response is not intended as an act of war, but as a demonstration, and that whether it leads to further conflict depends entirely on how the Korath Empire responds once it arrives. She recommends we prepare our forces to stand down and observe rather than engage. Vorin sat down slowly in the nearest chair, running a hand across his tired face. 2 hours remained before the countdown reached its end, and there was nothing left for the Korath Empire to do now but wait, and hope that whatever arrived through that quiet, patient signal would prove to be exactly as measured and reasonable as the message they had found deep inside the little ship's hidden systems. Word of the human refusal reached Grand Overseer Malketh within the hour, delivered by a shaken advisor Jareth Vol, who read the report aloud to the assembled council, in a voice that trembled slightly, despite his best efforts to remain composed. They will not stop it, Malketh said, once Jareth had finished. It was not a question. No, Grand Overseer, the human liaison was clear on that point. She stated the protocol does not allow for cancellation, regardless of apology. Malketh sat quietly for a long moment, his old hands folded on the stone table in front of him, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Around him, his advisors waited nervously, unwilling to break the silence of a ruler who had led them through 30 years of careful, patient leadership, and who now looked, for the first time any of them could remember, genuinely uncertain of what to do next. Archivist Sen, Malketh said finally, you spoke of the Vantic Concord. Tell me plainly, did their empire fall because of war? Because a human fleet arrived and destroyed them? Dorith Sen shook her head slowly. No, Grand Overseer. From what little the old records show, no great battle was ever fought. Their systems fell into chaos on their own, their fleets scattered, their leadership divided and quarreling, until the whole structure simply came apart from within. There is no record of any large-scale human attack at all. Then what destroyed them? I believe, Dorith said carefully, that whatever arrived in answer to their captured ship did not need to destroy them directly. I believe it was enough simply to demonstrate a power the Concord's own leadership could not answer, and could not explain to their people. Fear did the rest. An empire that cannot explain why it suddenly looks weak in front of its rivals rarely survives that weakness for long. The council chamber fell utterly silent at that. Every advisor at the table understood exactly what Dorothy was suggesting. It was not human weapons that had destroyed the Vantic Concord. It was the fear and chaos that followed once their rivals, their own people, and their own leadership had seen them humbled by something so small and quiet that it had seemed harmless only days before. Then our task, Malketh said slowly, standing from his chair, is not merely to survive whatever arrives above Fleet Station Kalis. Our task is to make certain that whatever happens there does not tear this empire apart from the inside, the way it tore apart the Concord before us. What do you propose, Grand Overseer? Jareth asked. I propose honesty, Malketh said. Full honesty, first with our own people, and then with whatever human force arrives. I will not have rumors and fear doing to us what fear did to the Concord. Send word to Admiral Thurn. I want every soldier at Fleet Station Kalis briefed clearly on what is happening and why. No secrets, no comforting lies, to protect anyone's pride. And send word to Diplomat Voran at Greywatch. I want her ready to open direct negotiations, the very moment that fleet arrives, however small or strange it may look. And if they attack regardless? Jareth asked quietly. If this response is not the measured demonstration the humans claim it to be? Malketh's expression grew heavy, the weight of 30 years of leadership pressing down visibly on his shoulders. Then Fleet Station Kalis will defend itself, as it must. But I do not believe, after everything Analyst Katu and Archivist Sen have shown us today, that destruction is truly what awaits us. I believe humanity has built something far more patient and far more dangerous than simple weapons of war, and I believe our best chance of surviving it is to meet it with patience of our own, rather than pride. The order went out within the hour, spreading quickly through every level of Fleet Station Kalis. Soldiers who had spent days whispering rumors about the strange little ship in Reskatu's laboratory finally received clear answers, along with clear instructions. Stand ready. Do not fire unless fired upon first. Allow the human vessel, whatever it turned out to be, to approach without interference. Admiral Thurn walked the length of the station's command hall personally that evening, speaking with officers at every station, his usual stern impatience replaced by something closer to grim, steady resolve. Reskatu, meanwhile, remained in her laboratory alongside Voran and Doss, watching the countdown tick steadily toward its end on her main screen. There was nothing left for her research team to do now, except wait and observe, and record everything that happened next, as carefully and honestly as they had recorded everything that came before. Do you think the Grand Overseer is right? Voran asked quietly, as the final hour began to slip away. Do you think patience will be enough? Res considered the question for a long moment before answering. I think, she said slowly, that we spent 15 years believing humans were young and small, simply because they chose to look that way. I think it would be foolish, after everything we have learned today, to keep believing we understand them better than we truly do. But yes, Captain, I choose to believe patience will be enough, because the alternative is a fear I am no longer willing to carry. Far from Fleet Station Kalis, in a quiet dock hidden deep within an asteroid field on the human side of the border, a single ship sat waiting, its dark hull barely visible against the black rock surrounding it. It was not large. It was not part of any grand invasion fleet. It was a single vessel, built for exactly this purpose and no other, named simply the Long Arm, by the small crew who maintained it. Admiral Grace Okafor stood in the control room overlooking the dock, watching through a reinforced window as the ship's engines began their slow warm-up cycle, a soft blue glow spreading along its hull. Systems check complete, Admiral, reported the young technician beside her. The Long Arm is ready to depart on your order. Crew status? Grace asked. Full autonomous operation, as designed. No crew required for this mission. Grace nodded slowly, remembering the long arguments that had gone into that particular design choice, years ago, when the Sparrow program had first been built. There had been those who argued a response fleet needed living commanders aboard, human judgment to make careful decisions in the moment. But the final design had gone another way, built instead around careful, patient programming, tested and reviewed for years, designed to demonstrate strength without ever risking a single human life in the process, and without giving any hot-headed commander the chance to escalate a situation that was meant to end peacefully. "Confirm the mission parameters one final time," Grace said. The technician read from his datapad. "The long arm will arrive at the last known location of Sparrow Unit Designation 742, currently docked at the Korath facility, known as Fleet Station Kalis. Upon arrival, it will establish a defensive perimeter, disable any weapon systems that power up against it, without engaging in direct destruction, unless fired upon first, and open a diplomatic channel, requesting the return of the unit and a full accounting of the incident. If met with peaceful cooperation, it will withdraw within 48 hours without further action. And if met with hostility?" The technician hesitated slightly before answering. "Then the long arm is authorized to respond with proportional and escalating force, up to and including full engagement, though our projections suggest that outcome remains unlikely, given the Korath Empire's demonstrated caution throughout this incident." Grace allowed herself a small, tired smile at that. Proportional and escalating force. It was a careful, bureaucratic way of describing exactly why the Sparrow program had never needed to demonstrate its full capability more than a handful of times since it was first built. Most species, once shown clearly what quiet patience could hide behind it, chose the wiser path without needing to see the rest. "Send the order," she said. "Let the long arm go." The dark ship slipped smoothly out of its hidden dock and into open space, its engines flaring briefly, before it vanished into the quiet dark, moving faster than almost anything the Korath Empire had ever tracked before, faster even than the ships that had humbled 2 cruisers during the Border March incident all those years ago. It carried no crew, no pilot's careful hand on its controls, only patient programming built from years of careful thought, and a single simple mission written deep into its systems: answer the call, demonstrate what waits behind humanity's quiet face, and give whoever had disturbed the peace one final chance to choose wisdom over pride. Far above the station, hidden among the turning stars, the countdown continued its final hours, steady and unhurried, indifferent to the fear and uncertainty spreading through every corner of the Korath Empire. Somewhere far away, across light years of quiet dark space, something was already moving, calm and patient, in answer to a call that had been waiting a very long time to finally be sent. The countdown reached 0, exactly on schedule, without any dramatic flash of light or sudden explosion to mark the moment. Deep inside the sealed compartment aboard the small captured ship, the steady blue pulse that Rescatu's team had watched for days simply changed one final time, brightening briefly, before settling into a slow, calm glow, as if it had finished its job and had nothing left to do but wait quietly for whatever came next. For nearly 2 full hours after the countdown reached 0, nothing happened at all. Res sat in her laboratory, watching her sensor readings with growing tension, half expecting some new signal, some final surprise from the little ship's hidden systems. Voran stood beside her, his hand resting on the sidearm at his belt out of old habit rather than any real belief it would help. Admiral Thurn paced the length of the station's command hall 3 decks above, checking every few minutes with his sensor officers for any sign of an approaching vessel. It was Fen, still serving aboard the Ashvane where it remained docked at the station, who first spotted it. "Captain," Fen called out, though Voran was not aboard to hear him directly, his voice instead carrying through the ship's internal comm to the bridge crew, who had remained on duty. "Sensors are picking up something. A single contact, approaching from beyond the outer patrol boundary. It is moving fast, faster than anything in our records." The report reached Admiral Thurn within seconds, and from there spread quickly through the entire station. Every soldier who had spent the last day preparing calmly for this exact moment now found their calm tested as the reality of it finally arrived. A single small dot appeared on Fleet Station Kalis's tactical display, moving steadily closer, its speed causing Korath sensor operators to double-check their instruments, certain at first that something must be malfunctioning. "Confirm reading," Thurn ordered sharply. "Confirmed, Admiral," came the reply, edged with disbelief. "One vessel, approaching at a velocity our systems suggest should be impossible for a craft of its apparent size." "Size?" "Small, Admiral, smaller than one of our own cruisers, smaller, even, than some of our escort ships." A tense murmur passed through the command hall. After everything Rescatu's research had suggested, after everything Archivist Sen had uncovered about the fall of the Vantic Concorde, many in that hall had quietly expected some vast and terrible fleet to arrive, an overwhelming display of force meant to crush any resistance before it could even begin. Instead, their sensors showed a single ship, alone, approaching without escort, without any visible show of the massive strength everyone had feared. "Do not fire," Thurn ordered immediately, remembering the Grand Overseer's clear instructions. "Hold all weapons at standby only. Let it approach." The single dark ship covered the remaining distance in a matter of minutes, closing the gap far faster than any Korath vessel could have managed, before slowing smoothly to a stop just outside the station's outer defense perimeter, close enough now for visual sensors to finally get a clear look at it. It was, by any measure, an unremarkable-looking vessel, sleek, dark, without the heavy plating or obvious weapon emplacements that Korath warships carried proudly on their hulls. It hung silently in space, utterly still, giving no outward sign of the purpose that had brought it there. "Sensor readings, now," Thurn demanded. The report that came back a moment later silenced the entire command hall. The single small ship's shields, according to every scan the station could run, were operating at a strength that Korath engineering had never come close to matching. Its weapon systems, though largely dormant for the moment, showed power readings that dwarfed anything mounted on even the Empire's largest capital ships, and most unsettling of all, the ship's own internal scans revealed almost no life signs whatsoever, only the faint, steady hum of an incredibly advanced automated system, running quietly and patiently, exactly as designed. "It is unmanned," Thurn said slowly, reading the report himself. "An entire fleet's worth of strength, and there is no one even aboard to command it." Rescatu, watching the same data feed from her laboratory several decks below, felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. She thought again of the design log Doss had uncovered, the humans' own words explaining exactly why they had built the Sparrow program the way they had. Humanity lacks the population and industrial base to maintain large standing fleets across every region of interest. She had read those words as an admission of weakness at the time. Now, watching a single unmanned vessel sit calmly outside the station, radiating more raw power than an entire Korath battle group, she understood the truth far more clearly. Humanity had simply chosen to spend its resources differently, building fewer, far more capable machines rather than vast fleets of ordinary ships, and trusting careful engineering to make up for whatever numbers they lacked. A channel request appeared on the station's communication system moments later, originating from the small dark ship itself. Admiral Thurn accepted it immediately, and a calm, clear voice filled the command hall, neither male nor female exactly, simply steady and even, speaking in careful, correctly translated Korath. "This is Automated Response Vessel Longarm, representing the Sol Defense Authority of Earth," the voice said. "I am here regarding the unauthorized recovery and tampering of Sparrow Unit Designation 742. I am authorized to request the immediate return of the unit, along with a full accounting of the incident from Korath authorities. I am further authorized to remain in this system for a period not exceeding 48 hours, to complete this exchange peacefully. Please respond." The command hall fell utterly silent, every officer turning instinctively toward Admiral Thurn, waiting for his response. Thurn, to his credit, did not hesitate long. "This is Admiral Cale Thurn, commanding Fleet Station Kalis," he said, keeping his voice as steady as he could manage. "We acknowledge your request. The unit in question, along with a full and honest report of everything that occurred since its recovery, will be prepared and transferred to you immediately. Grand Overseer Malkuth himself has ordered full cooperation in this matter." There was a brief pause before the calm voice responded again. "Understood, Admiral Thurn. Your cooperation is noted and appreciated. Please proceed with the transfer at your earliest convenience." The tension in the command hall did not fully break, not yet, but something in the room shifted noticeably at those words. Appreciated. It was such a small, simple word, and yet it carried a weight that none of them had expected from a machine capable of leveling their entire station without breaking a visible sweat. Down in her laboratory, Rescatu wasted no time preparing the transfer. Working quickly alongside Doss and a small team of technicians, she gathered every log, every scan, every piece of research her team had gathered over the past several days, along with the small human ship itself, carefully sealed once more, and loaded onto a transport shuttle bound for the waiting Longarm. Voran Dask insisted on accompanying the transfer personally, despite Ress's initial objections that it was not strictly necessary. "If something goes wrong," he told her simply, "I would rather be there than sitting safely in this laboratory wondering what happened." The shuttle carrying the recovered Sparrow and the full research report crossed the short distance to the waiting Longarm without incident. As it drew close, a section of the dark ship's hull slid open smoothly, revealing a docking bay far larger and more advanced than anything the shuttle's small crew had expected from a vessel of its outward size. It seemed, Voran thought, as he watched the bay doors open, as though the ship's interior somehow held more space than its exterior should have allowed, though he knew that was likely simply a trick of unfamiliar human engineering rather than anything truly impossible. The transfer completed smoothly, robotic systems aboard the Longarm receiving the sealed Sparrow and the accompanying data logs with quiet, mechanical efficiency. Once everything had been loaded, the calm voice spoke again, this time directly to Voran and the small shuttle crew waiting nervously nearby. "Transfer confirmed. Thank you for your cooperation, Captain Dask." Voran blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" "Your name and rank were included in the transferred records, Captain. I have also reviewed Analyst Katu's full research report. Your team's conduct throughout this incident was measured and careful, despite understandable fear. This will be noted favorably in my report to Seoul Defense Authority." Voran was not entirely sure what to say to that. He had spent the last several days bracing for destruction, for war, for some terrible punishment, in answer to a mistake that had, in hindsight, been an entirely honest one. Instead, he found himself receiving something close to a compliment from the very machine that held the power to end his entire station without effort. "May I ask," Voran said carefully, "what happens now?" "I will remain in this system for the agreed period, reviewing the full circumstances of the incident alongside Seoul Defense Authority Command," the voice replied. "Assuming no further complications arise, I anticipate a peaceful resolution, likely including a formal diplomatic exchange between our two governments regarding the boundaries of Sparrow deployment zones, to help prevent similar incidents in the future. And if complications do arise?" There was a brief pause before the voice answered, and though it remained calm and even, something in its tone made Voran's stomach tighten slightly. "Then I am equipped to handle those complications as well, Captain. I would prefer, however, that it does not come to that. I suspect you would prefer the same." "I would," Voran admitted quietly. "Then let us hope," the voice said, "that patience continues to serve both our peoples better than fear." The shuttle returned to Fleet Station Callus without further incident, though the tension aboard the station did not fully ease. For the following day and a half, the Longarm remained exactly where it had first stopped, silent and still, occasionally exchanging careful diplomatic messages with both Admiral Thurn's command staff and, through longer relay delays, directly with Grand Overseer Malketh's council, back on the Korath homeworld. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the Empire, despite efforts to manage the story carefully. Soldiers aboard the station spoke quietly among themselves about the single small ship that had arrived alone, and yet radiated more strength than an entire battle fleet. Rumors grew, as rumors always do, some exaggerating the danger, others exaggerating the humans' politeness, into something almost comical. But beneath all the rumors, a single truth began to settle steadily into the minds of everyone who had witnessed the encounter firsthand. Humanity was not the young, small, unproven species the Empire had comfortably assumed it to be for the past 15 years. Not everyone aboard Fleet Station Kalis shared the same careful patience that Admiral Thurn and Grand Overseer Malketh had ordered. Late on the second day of the Longarm's silent vigil, a young weapons officer named Corin Dask, no relation to Voran despite the shared name, found himself standing watch on one of the station's outer defense platforms, staring out at the small dark shape that had humiliated his entire empire without firing a single shot. Corin had lost a cousin during the Border March incident years before, a young soldier aboard one of the two cruisers destroyed that day. He had grown up hearing his family speak bitterly of the humans who had killed her, and the years since had done little to soften that bitterness. Watching the Longarm sit calmly outside the station, untouched and unbothered, stirred something dark and reckless in him that his training had not fully prepared him to control. Without informing his superior officer, Corrin quietly powered up the targeting systems on his platform's secondary weapon array, telling himself he was simply running a routine check, though some part of him already knew that was a lie. His hands hovered over the firing controls for a long moment, old grief and old anger warring against years of discipline. It was Fen, monitoring the platform's systems remotely from aboard the Ashvane, who noticed the sudden spike in weapon activity first. "Captain," he called out urgently over the ship's comm, though Vorin had returned to the station itself by then. "Outer Platform 7 is powering weapons without authorization." The alert reached Admiral Thurn within seconds, and he moved faster than his old bones had any right to move, racing personally toward the platform's control room, alongside a small security team. They arrived just as Corrin's finger hovered above the final firing switch, his face pale with the terrible weight of what he was about to do. "Stand down," Thurn barked, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the control room like a blade. "Weapons officer, stand down immediately." Corrin froze, his hand trembling above the controls, old grief and sudden fear now fighting for control of his shaking body. "Admiral," he said, his voice cracking, "they killed my cousin. They sit out there like nothing happened, like we should simply apologize and move on, and no one will even try to." "I understand your grief," Thurn said, his voice softening slightly even as his eyes remained hard and unwavering. "But if you fire on that ship, you will not avenge your cousin. You will confirm to every human watching that the entire Korath Empire cannot be trusted to keep its word, and you may very well doom every soul aboard this station in the process. Stand down, now." For a long, terrible moment, no one in the control room moved. Then, slowly, Corrin's shoulders sagged, and his trembling hand finally pulled back from the firing controls. Security officers moved in quickly to escort him away, and the weapon array powered back down to standby, the whole incident lasting less than 3 minutes from beginning to end. Aboard the Long Arm, the calm automated voice that governed its systems had, of course, noticed the brief spike in targeting activity the moment it occurred. A message arrived at Admiral Thurn's private terminal, only minutes after the incident had been resolved. "Admiral Thurn," the message read, "my sensors detected an unauthorized weapons activation on your outer Platform 7, followed by a rapid stand-down. I have logged the incident but taken no action, as no weapon was discharged, and the situation appears to have been resolved through your own command structure. I would ask, however, that such incidents be prevented more reliably going forward, for the safety of all involved." Thurn read the message twice, his old heart still pounding from the close call, before typing a careful reply. "You have my sincere apology, and my assurance that the matter will be addressed. Might I ask why you chose not to respond more forcefully to an armed threat against your vessel?" The reply came after only a brief pause. "Because the threat was resolved before it became an action, Admiral. I am built to respond to what happens, not to what nearly happens. Punishing an entire station for the momentary lapse of one grieving soldier would serve no purpose beyond cruelty, and cruelty was never the purpose of this mission." Thurn sat back in his chair, staring at those words for a long time, after sending his own brief reply of thanks. He had led soldiers for most of his adult life, had disciplined plenty of them for far smaller lapses than nearly firing on a foreign vessel during a diplomatic standoff. And yet here was a machine, built by a species he had spent 15 years quietly underestimating, choosing restraint and understanding over punishment, in a moment where punishment would have been not only justified, but expected. He found himself, for the first time since this entire strange incident had begun, genuinely curious what kind of people could have built something like this. Not merely powerful, not merely dangerous, but patient and fair, in a way that made the Empire's own long history of proud, forceful diplomacy look suddenly rather small by comparison. Grand Overseer Malketh, watching the reports arrive steadily from Fleet Station Kalis, allowed himself a small measure of relief as the hours passed without any sign of hostility from the waiting Long Arm. He had read Admiral Thurn's account of the near incident on Platform 7, with a mixture of alarm and something close to gratitude. Alarm at how close his empire had come to disaster through one soldier's grief, and gratitude that the machine watching over the whole affair had chosen mercy rather than swift punishment. He called Archivist Dorith Sen to his private chambers that evening, wanting to hear her thoughts away from the formal setting of the council table, where advisors so often chose careful, guarded words over honest ones. "You have read the reports," Malketh said, once she had settled into the chair across from his desk. "What do you make of them?" Dorothy considered the question carefully before answering, as she always did. "I think, Grand Overseer, that we have spent 15 years measuring humans against the wrong scale entirely. We asked how many ships they had, how large their fleets were, how many worlds they claimed. Those were never the right questions. The right question was always how patient they were willing to be, and how carefully they had prepared for exactly this kind of moment. You believe there are more of these sparrows out there?" "I believe it would be foolish to assume otherwise," Dorothy said. "A species that builds a single ship capable of humbling an empire, and then scatters small, quiet warnings of that ship's coming across every contested corner of space it can reach, is not a species interested in conquest through force alone. It is a species that has learned, perhaps through hard history we do not yet fully understand, that patience frightens a rival far more effectively than any show of endless armies ever could." Malketh nodded slowly, turning to look out his window once more at the calm lights of his capital, so peaceful and unaware of how close they had all come, in these past few days, to sharing the same fate as the Vantic Concord before them. "Then our path forward is clear enough," he said quietly. "We must learn to be as careful with them as they have been with us. No more assumptions, no more quiet contempt dressed up as caution. If humanity has built its strength on patience, then patience is exactly what this empire must offer them in return, for as long as it takes to build something better between our two peoples than fear." Dorothy rose slowly from her chair, offering a small, respectful bow before turning to leave. At the door, she paused, glancing back at her old, tired ruler, one final time. "For what it is worth, Grand Overseer, I believe you are asking the right question at last. Whether the rest of the empire will listen, once the long arm finally departs and the fear begins to fade, is a different matter entirely." Malketh said nothing to that, only nodding slowly as she left, and turning back once more to the window, wondering quietly just how many other sparrows might be scattered patiently across the quiet, unclaimed corners of the galaxy, waiting, unnoticed, for a mistake the Empire had not yet made. On the third day of the Long Arm's quiet vigil above Fleet Station Kalis, a formal diplomatic exchange finally began, conducted through a careful combination of direct communication with the automated ship itself, and longer, more detailed relay messages traveling back and forth to Admiral Grace Okafor at Outer Watch Command. Grand Overseer Malketh insisted on joining the exchange personally, despite the discomfort of his advisors, who worried it placed too much of the Empire's dignity directly at risk. "Our dignity," Malketh told them plainly, "was already placed at risk the moment one of our patrols decided a small drifting ship was ours to take without asking. I would rather spend what remains of it honestly than pretend a problem this large can be solved by hiding behind lesser officials." The exchange, once it began, proved far less confrontational than many aboard Fleet Station Kalis had feared. Grace Okafor, speaking through a relay channel, with a delay of several minutes each way, addressed Malketh directly, her tone calm and businesslike, rather than triumphant or cruel. "Grand Overseer Malketh," she began, once the connection had stabilized, "let me first say that Sol Defense Authority has reviewed the full account provided by your researchers, along with the Long Arm's own observations during its time in your system. We find no evidence of deliberate hostility in this incident. Your patrol found a drifting vessel and brought it in for study, exactly as any reasonable power might do when faced with unidentified technology near its border. The mistake was one of ignorance, not malice, and we do not intend to treat it as though it were the latter." Malketh, listening to the translated message, felt a small measure of the tension in his chest finally begin to ease. "We are grateful for your understanding, Admiral Okafor. I will say plainly that the past 3 days have taught my empire more about the true nature of your people than the previous 15 years combined. We had believed humanity to be young and small, and not yet a serious concern along our borders. I understand now how deeply mistaken that belief truly was." There was a pause before Grace's reply arrived, longer than the simple relay delay alone could explain, as though she had taken a moment to consider her words carefully before sending them. "I would ask you to remember, Grand Overseer, that our smallness is not entirely a pretense. Humanity does not possess the vast population or endless resources that your empire commands across its many worlds. Everything we have built, the Sparrow program included, exists because we learned, through difficult and costly experience, that we could not hope to match larger powers through numbers alone. We chose instead to build fewer things, more carefully, and to make the cost of underestimating us higher than any potential gain from doing so. It is not a boast, Grand Overseer. It is simply how a smaller people survives among larger neighbors. Malketh considered those words for a long moment before responding, thinking of Dorith Sen's careful analysis, of the design log Reskatu's team had uncovered, describing the very same reasoning in humanity's own quiet, technical language. Then perhaps, he said finally, our two peoples have more in common than either of us realized. The Korath Empire, too, has spent generations learning how to survive among larger threats, though we chose a different path to do it, built on unity and shared strength across many worlds, rather than careful, solitary deterrence. I would welcome the chance to understand your path more fully, Admiral Okafor, if you would be willing to share it. The negotiations that followed over the next several hours covered a great deal of practical ground. Grace Okafor agreed to share, in general terms, the rough boundaries of regions where Sparrow units might reasonably be expected to operate, allowing Korath patrols to exercise appropriate caution around unidentified small vessels in the future, without needing to fear every drifting piece of debris along the border. In exchange, Malketh offered a formal written apology on behalf of the Empire, along with an agreement to establish a permanent diplomatic office at Greywatch, staffed by officials with the authority to resolve future misunderstandings quickly, before they could ever again escalate toward the kind of crisis the past several days had brought. There was also, quietly and almost as an afterthought amid the larger diplomatic business, the matter of the young weapons officer, who had nearly fired on the long arm during its vigil above the station. Admiral Thurn had expected the incident to complicate negotiations badly, once it inevitably came to light, and he raised it himself during one of the later sessions, unwilling to let it surface later as a hidden embarrassment. There was an incident aboard our station, Thurn admitted to Grace Okafor directly, involving a young officer who came close to firing on the long arm without authorization. He acted out of grief rather than malice. I wish to inform you of it plainly, and to ask what consequence, if any, your side wishes to see for it. Grace's reply, when it came, surprised nearly everyone listening. The long arm already reported the incident to us in full, Admiral Thurn, including its own decision not to escalate in response. I have reviewed the officer's record. A cousin lost during the border march incident is a genuine wound, and grief does strange things to even disciplined soldiers. We do not request punishment beyond whatever your own command structure deems appropriate for the breach of protocol itself. We would ask only that he be given the chance to understand, in time, that the ship he nearly fired upon showed him considerably more patience than his anger offered it in return. Thurn passed that message along personally to Corin Dask a few days later, delivering it not as a formal reprimand but as a quiet, private conversation in his own office. Corin, who had spent the days since the incident bracing for the harshest punishment the Empire's military code allowed, listened in stunned silence as Thurn read Grace Okafor's words aloud to him. They are not asking for your dismissal, Thurn said, once he had finished. They are not even asking for your demotion. They are asking, simply, that you understand what almost happened and why it mattered that it did not. Corin sat quietly for a long moment, old grief and new shame mixing uncomfortably in his chest. I do not understand it, Admiral, he admitted finally. Why show mercy to the very soldier who nearly attacked them? I have asked myself much the same question these past several days, Thurn said. I believe the answer, as best I can offer it, is that mercy shown freely costs the giver very little, and yet it can change the receiver more deeply than any punishment ever could. You will carry this moment with you regardless of what discipline I choose to hand down. I suspect their choice to forgive it, rather than punish it, will stay with you far longer than any formal reprimand ever would have. Corin remained in service aboard Fleet Station Kalis for many more years afterward, and though the story of his near mistake followed him quietly for a long while among his fellow officers, he became known, in time, as one of the calmest and most careful weapons officers in the entire fleet, a change that more than one colleague privately credited to the strange mercy shown him by a machine he had once tried to destroy. Rescatu's full research findings were also formally acknowledged and returned to human authorities, alongside a personal note of gratitude from Grace Okafor herself, thanking the analyst for the care and honesty with which her team had documented the entire incident, rather than attempting to hide or minimize their mistakes. "Your analyst Katu," Grace wrote in a private message that reached Ress's laboratory terminal late on the final day of negotiations, "handled a situation that has ended empires before, with remarkable clarity and honesty. Please extend my personal thanks to her and her team. It is precisely this kind of careful, truthful work that allows situations like this one to end in understanding, rather than tragedy." Ress read the message quietly at her desk, feeling an unexpected warmth settle over the exhaustion that had built steadily in her over the past several days. She thought of the tense hours spent studying the small sealed compartment, of the fear that had gripped the entire station once the countdown had been discovered, and of how close, despite everything, they had come to a far darker outcome than the one now unfolding. Captain Voran Dask found her there a short while later, reading the message a second time. "Good news, I take it?" he asked, leaning against the doorway of her office. "The best kind," Ress said, allowing herself a tired smile. "The kind where nobody has to die to prove a point." The long arm departed Korath space exactly as promised, 48 hours after its arrival, slipping away into the dark just as swiftly and quietly as it had come, carrying the recovered Sparrow unit and Rescatu's full research documentation back toward human territory. Its departure was marked by no dramatic farewell, no final show of strength, simply a brief final message broadcast to Fleet Station Kalis as it powered up its engines for the journey home. "This concludes the Sparrow response protocol for Unit 742, the calm voice said. "Thank you for your cooperation throughout this process, Admiral Thurn, Grand Overseer Malkuth. I hope our next meeting, should one occur, takes place under calmer circumstances than these." "As do we," Thurn replied simply, watching the small dark shape shrink steadily on his tactical display until it vanished entirely into the quiet dark beyond the station's sensors. In the weeks that followed, word of the incident spread quietly but steadily through the wider Korath Empire, and eventually beyond it, carried along trade routes and diplomatic channels to other powers who had, until now, shared the same quiet assumptions about humanity's smallness and youth. The story changed a little with each retelling, as stories always do, growing more dramatic in some versions, more restrained in others. But the core of it remained the same everywhere it traveled. An empire had captured what looked like humanity's smallest and most harmless ship, only to discover that its true cargo was not a weapon at all, but a patient, quiet promise that had been kept, exactly as written, without exception and without mercy for pride, though with genuine mercy for honest mistakes. Captain Voran Dask received a quiet commendation for his conduct throughout the crisis, though he found himself, in the months that followed, thinking less about the recognition and more about the strange, calm voice of the long arm and the odd, unexpected kindness it had shown in a moment where cruelty would have been so easy to justify. He requested, sometime later, a transfer to the newly established diplomatic office at Greywatch, a decision that surprised many of his old colleagues, who had known him only as a steady, unremarkable patrol captain, content with the quiet routine of border duty. Why the sudden interest in diplomacy? Rescatu asked him once, not long before her own research posting took her elsewhere in the Empire. Voran considered the question for a long moment before answering honestly. "Because I spent 3 days terrified that a mistake I made without any bad intention at all might destroy everyone I was responsible for protecting. I would like to spend whatever years I have left making sure fewer people ever have to learn that same lesson the hard way." Ress nodded slowly, understanding the sentiment more than she let on. She too had changed in small but lasting ways since that strange week at Fleet Station Kalis. Her research now focused less on studying captured alien technology as prizes to be conquered and understood for advantage, and more on careful, honest documentation, meant to prevent exactly the kind of dangerous misunderstanding that had so nearly destroyed them all. Grand Overseer Malkuth, for his part, spent the remaining years of his long rule quietly reshaping how the Korath Empire approached first contact with unfamiliar powers, insisting on caution and careful study over swift, confident conquest, a policy that some of his more traditional advisors grumbled about privately, but which none of them dared challenge openly. not after everything the whole empire had so nearly lost. And far away, back in human territory, the story of the sparrow that had frightened an empire became, in its own quiet way, something close to legend among the small crews who maintained the wider network of similar units scattered across the contested edges of known space. It was not told as a tale of triumph or conquest, the way such stories might have been told by a prouder, louder people. It was told instead the way humans had always preferred to tell their most important stories, quietly, plainly, and with a certain careful satisfaction in a promise kept exactly as intended. At Greywatch, the small neutral station where the entire crisis had first been reported through careful, nervous diplomatic channels, Essa Voren found herself, some months later, sharing a quiet meal with Sarah Klein, the two of them having grown into an easy friendship over the following weeks of steady, ordinary diplomatic work that followed the crisis. It was Sarah who finally raised the subject that had lingered unspoken between them, since that tense night when Essa had first delivered news of the captured sparrow. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, setting down her cup. "That night, when you first told me about the ship, were you frightened?" Essa considered the question honestly before answering. "Yes," she admitted. "Deeply. I did not fully understand why at the time, only that something in your voice told me the situation was far worse than my orders suggested. I have thought about that conversation often since." "May I tell you something in return?" Sarah asked. "I was frightened too, that night. Not of what might happen to your people, though I worried for that as well. I was frightened of what it would mean if the system failed to work as gently as it was designed to. We built the Sparrow program hoping we would rarely, if ever, need to use it in earnest. Learning that a sparrow had finally been triggered meant we were about to find out, for the first time in years, whether all our careful planning would actually hold up against real fear and real pride on both sides." "And did it?" Essa asked. "Hold up, I mean." Sarah smiled slightly, glancing out the small viewport of the station, toward the quiet dark beyond, dotted faintly with distant stars. "I believe it did. Your Grand Overseer chose honesty over pride. Our Admiral chose patience over anger, and somewhere in between, a great many ordinary people on both sides simply did their best not to make things worse. I do not think any system, however carefully designed, could ask for much more than that." Essa nodded slowly, thinking of Voren Dask, now serving alongside her at Greywatch's newly established diplomatic office, learning the slow, careful work of preventing exactly the kind of misunderstanding that had so nearly cost them all so dearly. She thought, too, of Reskatu's careful research, of Admiral Thurn's steady discipline, of Grand Overseer Malketh's quiet wisdom in choosing truth over comfortable pride. It had taken a great many small, careful choices, made by a great many ordinary people, to turn what might have been a second Vantic Concord into something closer to the beginning of genuine understanding between two very different peoples. Somewhere among the countless stars scattered across the quiet dark between known civilizations, other sparrows continued their patient watch, small and unremarkable, waiting the way they had always waited, for a mistake that might never come, or that might come tomorrow, ready either way to deliver, calmly and without anger, the same simple lesson the Korath Empire had so nearly learned too late. Humanity's smallness had never been weakness. It had only ever been patience, carefully disguised, and it would remain exactly that, quiet and watchful, for as long as the stars themselves continued their own slow, patient turning.